Today we are very, very excited to introduce Captain Charlie Vogel, who is a retired South African airline pilot. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so we're very, very excited to talk to you about your career and how it was as a pilot and what you're doing with yourself. So perhaps we can start with, sort of like the beginning area. So what did you study in order to become a pilot, Charlie?
Well, in my day, I've been I've been in aviation for 50 years. All in all, I've been retired for 9 years now. And I started off in the Air Force after leaving school at the age of 18. And after joining the Air Force, I applied to be a pilot. And unfortunately, I failed my medical. And the medical in the Air Force is very, very strict. It's 20/20 vision and all those kind of things that you need to do, notwithstanding the fact that they do psychometric tests on you. And I failed because of the decompression chamber of my ears, and the pressure was a bit much for my ears. And I went into the engineering faculty for 3-4 years. And then I reapplied for pilot's medical, and I was lucky to get through this time. And that was based on the doctor that knew me, and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to leave the Air Force and I'll have to become a lawyer or something, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And I got through, and he said, "Whatever you do, don't fly fighter jets. Stay on something like transport aircraft and helicopters." And I was lucky, I got through. And I started flying helicopters in Cape Town at the Air Force Base at Eysterplaat. And it was one of 2 courses, if I'm not mistaken, that they permitted for direct entry helicopter pilots, because normally they put you onto fixed wings at a place called the Notta Air School. That's in Gauteng, in Nigel. And if that's not in Mpumalanga, I'm not sure. But I went straight onto helicopters, and I spent 10 years in the Air Force after that. So I did 8 years as a helicopter pilot. And I decided to leave the Air Force when things started getting a little bit hot on the border. Not that I was scared of going to the border, but we were doing ship service, flying on the back of military warships on frigates. And they wanted to send us to the border as well. And having a wife and young kids, it became a little bit heavy. And I thought, no, well. And then a company called Court Helicopters, which was located, which is now the area where they have the foreshore in Cape Town at the docks. And I started doing ship service there. And I did that for 9 years. And we were servicing ships during the time that the Yom Kippur War was on, and they closed the Suez Canal due to the war with Israel.
Yes.
And we were flying during the day, during the night, and servicing the ships that were coming around the Cape. And we were carrying cargo, and we were carrying personnel, and we were transferring them to the ships and back and forth because the ships weren't coming into the harbor because of the costs involved and the time factor involved. And that's basically what I did on helicopters for a good 9 years. And then I thought, well, helicopter flying is getting a little bit monotonous now, and flying at night in all kinds of weather in the Cape, especially in the winter. And you guys all know about the winter weather.
Yeah.
And I decided, no, I wanted to get into the airline. So I joined a company called Eskom. I don't know if you've ever heard of this company called Eskom.
I'm familiar with the company, yes.
They were a wonderful company in the days at one stage, and I joined them as a corporate pilot. And I got my fixed wing experience there, and I was there with them for also a good 10 years. And then in 1990, Eskom decided to make their drastic changes, which we're all suffering under now. And I decided to join the airline. And Airlink was then a company that was just starting up, and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip came to South Africa to open the airlines, strangely enough, and
Wow.
I was lucky to be involved with that. And they started very small, and I mean, you look at Airlink today, they've become a major company, a major role player in the South African industry. And then I went to SA Express, which was part of SAA, and you can see some of the background of the cockpit of the airplanes that we were flying. And it was a wonderful life. And then I came up to retirement age, coming up to 63. And, older pilots are earning higher salaries, and, companies tend to want to get rid of them pretty quickly and employ junior pilots, because, I mean, junior pilots are just as qualified, maybe not with the experience, but they're just as qualified. And I was lucky enough to get a position at Royal Jordanian Airlines, flying out of Amman in Jordan. And I was there for 2.5 years. And then, strangely enough, I finished there, and I went back to SA Airlink, and I was there for another 3 years. And I was flying just before my 70th birthday, about 69 years old. So I was very fortunate. I had a very, very lucky career. I was very fortunate, and it was a career that I would do over tomorrow. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds so exciting, and like so much adventure and so much like sort of diversity, you experience that. I'm not even sure, like when we talk about a day in the life of, I wish we had 3 hours so we could talk about the helicopter and the airlink and your time in Jordan and traveling and all of that, but I have to narrow it down. So then maybe you could talk us through the day in the life of when you worked for SAA and Airlink and SA Express.
Well, Priya, the interesting thing is the life in a helicopter pilot is a lot different than the life in an airline pilot.
Okay.
A corporate pilot is something that I would go back to tomorrow, because it is more relaxed. Your passengers are known to you, and they normally ask you for your advice and your opinion, and away you go. The airline is absolutely different. The airline is very, very rigid, and rightfully so. I mean, safety in the airline is absolutely paramount. And, unfortunately in aviation, the rules and regulations that have been promulgated over the years are as a result of people having accidents. And as a result of that, the history of aviation is written in blood, unfortunately. Yes. And can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And as a result of that, the airlines have become so rigid that everything is prescribed. Everything is written down in what they call the standard operating procedures, and that is the only way that the airlines can really maintain a standard that is acceptable to the world organization called ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, part of the UN, which is based in New York. And as a result of that, the airline pilot would come to work in the morning, depending on what time the aircraft departs. But we're normally there about an hour and a half to 2 hours before a departure. And we would get our briefing, we would get our flight plan. Everything would be written out for you and prepared. And you would then brief your cabin crew. And you would basically tell the cabin crew how long you would be flying for the day, what kind of weather to expect, what kind of passengers we would be expecting, if there are any VIPs on board, because once or twice I flew with Prince Harry.
Oh, wow.
That's exciting. He was still a gentleman in those days. And anyway, he... we discuss those things with the flight attendants, and please don't call them hostesses. They're not hostesses anymore.
Yes.
But we spoke to the flight attendants, and then obviously we discussed the emergencies, what we would say if there was an emergency on board while we were flying. And we would say to them, I would call you by your name, or to tell you to come to the cockpit, or we'd have a code, and we'd change that code every day. For example, we'd use a code like Russian or jackal or tiger or whatever word came to mind. And if we ever announced that over the intercom, the flight attendant, the purser would then come to the cockpit, and we would explain the situation to them. And then obviously it would then depend on how we would handle that emergency, whether it is life-threatening, whether it is just a condition where we'd have to do an emergency landing, whether there would be an emergency evacuation, all those kind of things we would discuss. And that would basically be the briefing. And then obviously we would discuss and how many hours we'd be flying, how long the flying time would be, and so forth and so forth. So that's basically how it would work. And then obviously we'd go to the airplane, and then between the two pilots, myself and the first officer, the one would prepare the cockpit, set up everything, do up all the tests, make sure that everything was functional. Anything that didn't work, we would report that to the engineers, who would be close at hand. They would try and sort it out. And then obviously, being a mechanical machine, any airplane, like a motor car, could have some minor problems, and the airplane would be quite safe to depart with those minor problems. And we would obviously discuss that, and how it would affect us, if there's any effect that would limit our operation, like flying at a lower altitude, or looking at pressurization problems that we might have. All those things would come into play. And once we've got that all sorted out, then you as the captain, or myself as a captain, would then go and walk around the aircraft outside, monitor the refueling, and make sure that everything on the airplane on the outside looked normal. And that would be basically that. And then we would get in the airplane, we would start up, and we would take off, and then hopefully we would eat coffee and breakfast.
Hopefully. Charlie, yes? Go ahead.
Hello, Priya.
Hi, can you still hear me, Charlie?
I think you've disappeared. Where have you gone?
I'm still here. I can still see you.
Okay, got you.
Okay.
Got you.
I was going to ask you now, you mentioned all of the code words for significant situations that you would have to deal with. During your tenure as a pilot, did you ever, have to deal with a situation like that?
No, I was extremely lucky, or I was either very good. I don't know which it was, but I've never had to use those code words. I've never had a situation where we've had a major incident like an engine fire, or like happened recently with Boeing, the window popping out. So we haven't had any of those. I haven't personally had any of those. I'm also very fortunate that I have a good technical background on the aircraft. I used to be a technical lecturer as well at one stage. And so I knew the aircraft systems very, very well. The one thing that I did have is I had a couple of medical emergencies where a flight attendant came to me and said, we've possibly got a heart attack, and we've diverted. I remember the last time I diverted was to Bulawayo in the days many years ago. And we, as a funny story, the doctor came into the cockpit, and I said, what's the prognosis? And he says, well, it looks like this guy's having a heart attack, and I really think we need to get into hospital. So I diverted. We landed at Bulawayo. And surprisingly enough, they were so organized. The ambulances were waiting. Everything was ready there. Refueling was there. Everything was there. And we were gone in 40 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And I actually found out afterwards when I thanked the doctor that he was a vet.
Hey, that's interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, those are the kind of things that we have, and it's up to the captain then to decide, whether the situation warrants a diversion or not. And when it comes to medical things, I was a type of guy, I don't play around with those kind of medical emergencies. And if somebody in authority and with an appropriate knowledge can say, look, this person needs to get onto the ground, then that's what I do.
Yes, of course. Charlie, we have a question, and it sort of ties in with a medical conversation that we're having, but specifically to the life of a pilot. I'll just pull it on stage and I'll read it to you. So Lizanne is asking, besides the medical tests, like you mentioned, you had to do some medical tests. What other exams did you have to do before you're allowed to fly commercially?
Priya, it's not an easy thing to become a commercial pilot. You need a class 2 medical or a class 3 medical. I think it's a class 2 medical, which means you're allowed to wear glasses, and the requirements aren't as stringent as the Air Force. In the Air Force, it's a class 1 medical, which means you've got to have 20/20 vision. You've got to have good hearing. You've got to be able to handle the decompression chambers. They drop you from 20,000 feet, to sea level in something like about 5 minutes. And it is a massive, massive strain on the ears. And, you've got to have, for example, in a commercial pilot, you've got to have 20/40 vision. So it's not as stringent as the Air Forces. The Air Forces are extremely stringent. You've got to have good hearing. You've got to have good blood pressure, lungs. You've got to be within reasonable weight. You don't want to have a BMI that's very, very high. Obviously, urine tests, G-forces, ECGs, and a physical examination. There have been few instances where pilots have had heart attacks on board, hence 2 pilots in the cockpit. But
yes.
The requirements are pretty stringent for a ab initio commercial pilot. Yes. The renewals aren't as bad because when you turn 55 and older, you do a medical every 6 months. Otherwise, it's every year.
Okay.
With a full-blown ECG.
Yes. What about any written exams that you require to? What are, if you could take us briefly through the written exams?
Okay. Written exams are basically 8 subjects that you have to write with the Department of Transport, or what they call the CAA, Commercial Civil Aviation Organization, based in Gauteng, in Midrand. And they set up the curriculum for commercial pilots. And the pass mark is 80%. It's very high. And it includes navigation, metrology, instruments, aircraft technical, aircraft theory. Well, my goodness, I can't think of them all. But there's quite a few subjects that you have to write. And it's very seldom that the guys get through it the first time. It's quite tough.
Charlie, do you think you had an additional advantage having studied engineering for a little bit when you had to do the written exams?
Yes, the engineering did help, but the problem is that I wanted to be a test pilot. And unfortunately, there was no university in South Africa that actually offered aeronautics as a subject in any of the universities in South Africa. And all I could do was go to Australia. My mom and dad couldn't afford it.
Of course.
So I joined the Air Force, and it was second best. But the Air Force in those days were expanding. It was one of the best air forces in Africa. In fact, notwithstanding Europe and America, but world at the time. And the training was absolutely out of the world.
Yeah. So on the training, we often hear how many hours you've got to actually fly in order to...
Well, the flying hours, I managed to accumulate something like about 16,000 hours in my career. But for a commercial pilot, it's 200 hours minimum. For a
Okay.
private pilot, it's 40 hours. And then there's obviously medicals. For a private pilot, obviously it's a lot less stringent, and the
Yes.
exam is a lot less stringent.
Sorry, folks, we seem to be having some small technical issues. We will be returning to the session very, very shortly. However, we've already answered
Doing
one
a flight
question.
test, and then once you passed, then you do a flight test with an official examiner, and you have to do that in a twin engine airplane. And they obviously cut an engine for you, so see how you handle it, and obviously they evaluate your circumstances. Can you mentally handle the situation and the stress? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a big one because you don't have the option of pulling over on the side of the road and checking the engine. Everything's got to be done up in the air.
Absolutely. You know, when you become an airline pilot, because you've got basically three categories of licenses, it's actually incorporated more, because now people that are flying with drones also need a license as issued by CIA. But basically, there's the PPL, the private pilot, the commercial pilot, the CPL, and the airline transport pilot. That is the highest qualification that you can get. Then obviously, you know, once you get a commercial license, it's not just a question that you've got 200 hours and a license issued by CIA. It's the experience and the type of aircraft that you've been flying, because airlines or corporate companies or a charter company will not just employ you with a minimum amount of hours. They want somebody that has got the experience. It's like any person, qualified person, a doctor, a dentist, anybody, they need to have the experience before they let loose.
Yeah. So on you know, considering experience and the fact that you say that there's 3 licenses for, you know, sort of your different kind of specialties that you want to get into, is it possible in your career as a pilot that you could do one leading to the other, or would you have to restart the entire process in order to go from one to the other?
Are you
Is there
talking about me?
jumping? No. In general, if you want to go
Oh,
from one kind of a pilot to a commercial to another, would
yes.
you restart and redo, or how would you go about it?
The main thing is there are many facets or ways of getting into flying. Obviously, the Air Force is the best way of doing it, because they will cover everything. The other way is to get into a cadet program with a recognized airline, and they will take you from that limit and move on. SAA did it for a while, they've stopped that now. Then the other way, of course, is to pay for it yourself, which could cost you up to R1 million to become an airline transport pilot.
Wow.
And then the government, I believe the government, I'm not quite sure of that, the government are giving bursaries to potential pilots.
Okay.
I don't know quite what it entails, but I have seen that the government is doing something. Whether it falls within the BE concept, I don't know, but obviously there is a program that's ongoing at the moment.
Okay, well that's good for our audience members. They can definitely do the research and find out, you know, if there are such government programs. And we're very happy to also assist in any way. If anyone has any questions, they can reach out to our team. We have another question. I'll just pull it off the screen for now. The question is, what is the potential for pilots in South African airlines to grow their careers?
That's a very good question. Since the demise of the old SAA, things have become very difficult. At first, SAA was the forerunner of all pilots coming into the country. And there were the occasional pilots that could afford, through finances, to finance their own flying careers up to a point of a commercial pilot. And then SAA would take them on from there. The potential at the moment is very, very poor, unfortunately, because SAA has downscaled so greatly, and they still have not managed to organize the takeover that's been going on for, I think, 2 years now, where I think it's Tutaco, the company, and Global Aviation that are going to take them over. But having said that, they've only got 8 airplanes. So their opportunities or their requirements for employing pilots is rather limited. Fly Safair, Airlink, Sem-Air, and Lift Airlines at the moment are probably the only airlines in the country that will employ you. If you can get as much as 1,500 hours, 1,500 hours, and you can get maybe a postgraduate degree, regardless of what it is,
Yes.
the overseas airlines would be more interested. And the postgraduate would obviously help you immensely to become a pilot, because it sets the profile for the right person to get into the airline.
Yes. Do you have any suggestions for sort of like a line of degrees from undergrad to postgrad that would be more beneficial for a student who might be interested in pursuing becoming a pilot? But like engineering, you wouldn't want a lawyer. You know what I mean? Your master's in law, you'd probably need your master's in something else.
Well, if I understand you correctly, Priya, doing something else from flying is something that never crossed my mind. Flying is a passion. It is an absolute passion. It's got so many facets: helicopter flying, commercial flying, corporate flying, airline flying, survey flying. I mean, there are many, and obviously the military. And you know, it is an absolute passion, and I do not know of one person in my 50 years of flying that ever came across a guy that said, "This is not my job. I don't like this."
Yeah, no, I understand that.
I hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was also curious to know, you mentioned a student could distinguish itself if the student had a postgraduate degree. If you could elaborate on that in terms of what kind of a postgraduate degree would be more beneficial.
I've flown with some guys that were lawyers that never finished the bar. I flew with potential doctors. I've flown with guys that had CAs. So yes, it makes you attractive to the airline, but it doesn't detract from the fact that you still have to get your qualifications. You know, you've got to get the hours, you've got to get the experience, and that's not an easy thing. It's not a question of just getting hours. It's a question of having the right type of airplanes on your license as well. Twin-engine airplanes, hopefully, and obviously things like EFIS, which is an acronym for Electronic Flight Information Systems, like you see in the background in the cockpit. That's all EFIS equipment, and especially today, everything is so electronic. And airplanes have become so sophisticated that you really don't, and I'm using the word lightly, you don't need a pilot anymore. The airplanes can literally do everything themselves. The technology is there and it's available for you.
Charlie, I'm so sorry. I'm loving this conversation. Unfortunately, it ends in 30 seconds. So I just want to take a quick opportunity to thank you so much for taking your time this Monday evening to talk to us and our students. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board. To our audience, if you have any questions, like we mentioned before, please feel free to reach out to the GradLink team. We're also welcome to help you with any questions. And if need be, we can direct you to the right individuals. So thank you everyone for everything. We're going to be ending the session now, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you very much, Charlie.
My pleasure, and congratulations, and hopefully somebody is going to become a pilot in your group.
Absolutely. Thanks, Charlie.
Okay, bye-bye.